I mean, the rent cap is totally not working. So we have this 5% rent cap, which, by the way, is the highest in the country, but almost nobody is subject to it because landlords know that there's a loophole where if you only rent to someone for a fixed period of time, usually a year, it doesn't apply. And so what's happening is that rents are rising much faster than that 5%. And so what that means for people is they get priced out of their community. They certainly get priced out of their home on a very regular basis. And increasingly, they get priced out of the province, which, you know, I'm sure you'll be talking about labor shortages and all kinds of other things. This is something we can't afford. We want young people to live here, and a third of the people in our province and much higher than that in our city are renters.
Over the last week, Claudia, I've heard some people talking on this show and in other places that the PC government seems to be, I hate to use the word afraid, but maybe wary of backlash from landlords because of what we heard from the minister last week with regards to the not to crack down on the fixed term leases, and the associate deputy minister saying the same thing, that they don't want to upset the housing market. What's your thought on that?
I don't think it makes any sense, if I'm being honest, Dan. We've got lots of cranes in the sky. We've got lots of building happening. Not much of it is actually affordable. And what we actually need is protection for renters that makes sense. They can build all the houses they want, but if people can't afford them, and if people are leaving our province, they're going to sit empty. So that's not going to be good for the housing market either. We need people to be able to have stable housing and work good jobs and live a good life in Nova Scotia. And right now, that piece, this housing piece, is glaringly absent from the government's plans to make sure that people can do that. And, everything's expensive. Things are expensive for property owners and landlords too, but things like enforcement, which all areas of the housing spectrum have argued for. The government itself commissioned a report that said we should do it. Things like a functional residential tenancy system where landlords could apply for rental increases and get those if they need them, but that tenants also knew that they were protected and could stay in their home for more than a year without an exponential rent increase at the end of that. That's what we need. And for some reason, this government absolutely refuses to take any action.
Wouldn't that create a whole bunch more red tape, though, if we had to have everybody go to appear before a tribunal or a government agency or whatever to apply for an increase in rent? Wouldn't that just create all kinds of government red tape?
No, it's just for an extraordinary increase. And this existed in Nova Scotia up until the 80s. It worked fine. It exists in lots of other provinces. So the idea is that you have a scheduled increase. So that could be 5%. That could be, whatever makes sense, tied to the cost of living, something reasonable. And that, both tenants and landlords should be able to accommodate those scheduled increases. But what we hear a lot as a kind of defense for extraordinary rent increases, well, we needed to replace the heating system or we needed to replace the windows and things are expensive. Okay. Right now, the only way landlords can recover that cost is to switch to fixed term leases and jack those rents. But we could have a system where people could have what's called security of tenure. They could know that they can stay in their home for more than a year, but landlords could also recover those costs if they need to. Not every time, not all the time. And the enforcement unit, the government commissioned their own study. It would be $1 million and a few more people a year in, the scheme of government budgeting. That's not a whole lot of money to make things work better and be a lot fairer.
And that was my next question. What do you think that enforcement unit should look like, and what kind of and how would it get its power, Claudia? Like, would it be a criminal offense, or would it be a bylaw, or how would that work?
We have the government themselves commissioned a report from Davis Peer a couple of years ago that laid all of this out. They would have the power of enforcement. It's civil, of course, not criminal, but they would be able, right now, the government talks a lot about balance. So they say we need a balance between tenants and landlords. And I'll tell you, the people we talk to have to take time off work, figure out how the residential tenancy system works, spend money to, make applications, take people to an appeal, and even if they win, nothing happens. It's almost impossible to enforce, and there's no penalty. So we don't have balance right now. We just have a system where if you can't afford to get into the housing market, which, by the way, in the last 5 years has become almost impossible for anyone who doesn't have extra help or a really good income, then, you have a terrible situation in housing. You're really at the mercy of a very unregulated system, which in a time when costs are going up the way they are, I think is going to be really challenging economically for us as we seek to fill all the jobs we have, to retain our young folks, and to do all the things that generally I think we all agree that we want to do.
Should we have rent control? Bottom line, should we have rent control in Nova Scotia?
Yes, we've had it before. It exists in lots of other places across the country, and it makes sense. It's fairness. It doesn't have to be something that is, as you say, a lot of red tape, nothing like that. It's just a shift in the system so that this government rent cap that is basically window dressing and doesn't works. That we have, some kind of system, and that rent cap can change year to year. It can be tied to an external metric like, the consumer price index. Again, we talked about extraordinary expenses can be accommodated, but we would have actual fairness in our rental system, and we don't have that now. And we don't have predictability now, which isn't good for anyone.